The key was cold. Not just cool to the touch, like old metal should be on a quiet afternoon, but a deep, biting cold that seemed to sink right into my skin, past the bone, and into a part of my memory I had long since walled off. It rested heavily in my palm, a small, ornate piece of brass my father had given me when I was a little girl, a fairy tale trinket for what I had always believed was a fairy tale life. But as I stood in the suffocating silence of his old study, the air thick with the scent of aging paper, leather, and forgotten promises, my gaze was fixed on the small, dark wood box tucked away on the highest shelf. It was almost hidden, a shadow within a shadow. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm that echoed the single, terrifying thought that had taken root in my mind. I am about to lose my mother. What I didn't know yet, what I couldn't possibly have understood in that moment of trembling anticipation, was that I had already lost her years ago. The real question was no longer if our life was a lie, but how deep the deception truly went, and if I had the strength to uncover it.
For 24 years, my mother, Helen, was the sun I orbited. After my father's sudden passing when I was 16, she pulled me into her gravitational field so completely that I never imagined another way to live. She became my architect, my confidant, my protector. Our home wasn't just a house, it was a carefully curated ecosystem of her love. The walls were painted a soft butter yellow. The scent of her rose garden drifted through the open windows, and her laughter, a light and airy sound, was the constant soundtrack to my days. She was the textbook definition of a devoted mother, the kind my friends watched in movies with a sigh of envy. She was selfless, nurturing, and her love for me felt as fierce and non-negotiable as the tides. Our life was built on beautiful, comforting rituals. Every morning, I'd come downstairs to find a cup of tea, steeped to perfection, waiting for me on the kitchen table. "Morning, sweet pea," she'd say, her smile a gentle beacon in the early light. "Did you dream of anything wonderful?" Our conversations flowed effortlessly. We'd dissect my college lectures on art history, laugh at the antics of our neighbor's clumsy golden retriever, and map out my future. She was the keeper of my dreams. When I whispered my ambition to become a graphic designer, she didn't just encourage me. She spent a week researching the best software and had it installed on a new computer as a surprise. When my own self-doubt crept in, a familiar ghost, she was the one to gently hold my chin, look me straight in the eye, and say, "You have your father's talent, Maya, and my grit. There is nothing you cannot do." She made me feel invincible, as long as I stayed within the warm circle of her arms. This bond, forged in the crucible of our shared grief, felt sacred and absolute. My best friend, Sarah, whose relationship with her own mother was a series of polite but distant negotiations, would often watch us with a kind of gentle wonder. "I don't know how you two do it. You're more like best friends than mother and daughter." And I believed we were. Helen wasn't just a part of my life, she was its primary architect. This was especially true when it came to the inheritance my father had left me. It was a significant sum, meant to be my foundation for the future. "It's an overwhelming responsibility, sweet pea," she had explained in the quiet, grief-stricken days after the funeral, her voice a soft murmur. "Let me manage the heavy lifting. You just focus on healing and your studies. I'll make sure it's safe for you." I handed over my trust without a second thought. To question her would have felt like a profanity, a deep and ugly betrayal of the woman who was sacrificing everything for me. But looking back now, from the other side of the truth, I can see the foreshadowing. It was there all along, woven into the beautiful tapestry of our life, like almost invisible threads of a darker color. They were so subtle, so easily rationalized, that I never saw the sinister pattern they were forming. There was the way she subtly curated my friendships. She never forbade me from seeing anyone, but she had a way of poisoning the well with a gentle, concerned tone. Sarah is a lovely girl, truly. But does she challenge you? You need to surround yourself with people who understand your potential. I would defend Sarah, but the seed of doubt was planted, a tiny, insidious weed. Then came Liam. He was my first real love. Not a frantic teenage crush, but a quiet, steady love that made me feel safe and seen. He was a geology student, calm and methodical, and he loved me for my quirks, not in spite of them. But my mother's warmth, so readily available to me, was a locked door to him. She was never rude. Helen was far too sophisticated for that. Instead, she employed a kind of polite, soul-crushing condescension. She'd call him a nice, simple boy, or comment that his ambitions were very practical. She was an expert at delivering a compliment that felt like an insult. I saw the way her subtle dismissals chipped away at his confidence. The day he ended things, his words were a confused echo of her own rhetoric. "I just don't think I'm what you need, Maya. You have this big, bright future. I don't want to hold you back." I ran home, shattered, and fell into my mother's waiting arms. She held me as I cried, stroking my hair and murmuring, "I know it hurts now, sweet pea, but it's for the best. He didn't deserve you." In my grief, I clung to her, believing that she had saved me from a future of mediocrity. I didn't see that she hadn't saved me. She had simply eliminated a threat to her control. The most glaring sign was her quiet insistence on managing every detail of my life, always under the guise of love. The gilded cage she built for me was so comfortable, its bars wrapped in velvet. I was a willing, happy prisoner, so mesmerized by the devotion of my warden that I never even thought to check if the door was locked.
The illusion of my perfect world didn't shatter with a dramatic explosion, but with a quiet, ugly crack. It happened on a warm Saturday in July at my Aunt Carol's annual summer barbecue. Carol, my mother's younger sister, was a woman whose kindness was matched only by her love for gossip. Her backyard was a chaotic symphony of sizzling burgers, laughing children, and the drone of neighborhood lawnmowers. I was in the kitchen, arranging slices of watermelon on a platter, when my mother came inside, her cell phone pressed to her ear. She was facing the window, her back to me, and didn't notice I was there, partially hidden by the open door of the stainless steel refrigerator. She was speaking in a low, conspiratorial tone, but in the relative quiet of the house, I heard my name. "I know, Sandra, but what can I do?" she said, her voice dripping with a kind of performative sympathy that made the skin on my neck prickle. "Maya is just so fragile. She has these artistic ambitions, which is sweet, but she has absolutely no concept of how the real world works. If I weren't guiding her every step of the way, she'd burn through her father's money in a year." A beat of silence followed as she listened to her friend on the other end. I stood frozen, my hand hovering over the bright red fruit. Then she let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound completely devoid of warmth or humor. "Oh, the boyfriend? Liam? Please. A nice boy, but utterly ambitionless. He was filling her head with nonsense about moving to a small town. It took some serious work, but I finally made him see he wasn't what she needed. It was for her own good, of course. She's just too trusting to see it." The heavy refrigerator door suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My blood turned to ice in my veins. It took some serious work? Made him see? The breakup had been the most painful experience of my young life. It had hollowed me out for months. And my mother, the one who had held me, the one who had told me I was better off, had been the architect of that pain. She had been a saboteur disguised as a savior. With a trembling hand, I quietly pushed the refrigerator door shut. The magnetic latch clicked into place with a soft, final sound, an echo of a door slamming shut inside my own heart. She turned at the sound and her eyes widened for a fraction of a second. A flicker of pure panic crossed her face before her well-practiced mask of serene motherhood slipped back into place. "Oh, Sweet Pea, there you are. I was just catching up with an old friend. You know how it is." I couldn't find my voice. I just looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. I saw the faint lines of calculation around her eyes that I had always mistaken for laugh lines. I saw the subtle tension in her jaw that I had always assumed was the strain of being a single parent. I forced a small, tight smile. "I was just helping Aunt Carol with the fruit." I brushed past her, and the scent of her perfume, a classic Chanel No. 5 that I had always associated with comfort and safety, suddenly seemed cloying and suffocating, the smell of a beautiful lie. For the rest of the afternoon, I became an observer. I watched her as she moved through the party, a master of her craft. I watched her charm my uncle with a story about my latest academic achievement. I watched her hug a cousin while whispering about how worried she was about my reclusive tendencies. She was playing the part of the perfect doting mother, and she was flawless. But all I could see was the actress. All I could feel was the chilling realization that my entire life had been a stage, and I was the only one who didn't know it. That night, lying in bed, staring at the familiar shadows on my ceiling, I felt a profound and terrifying sense of dislocation, as if the very foundations of my life had turned to sand. The pure, unconditional love I had built my world upon was a lie. And for the first time, when I thought of the woman sleeping down the hall, I no longer felt love. I felt fear. The weeks following the barbecue were a slow, agonizing descent. My mother, with the unnerving intuition of a predator, must have sensed the shift in me. The new watchfulness in my eyes, the slight hesitation in my hugs. Her campaign to isolate and control me, once a subtle undercurrent, became a suffocating tide. The unraveling was not a single event. It was a methodical, piece-by-piece dismantling of my reality. This wasn't just a family drama. It was the quiet, systematic erosion of my soul. Her first and most effective weapon was money. One evening, she sat me down at the polished dining room table, her face a mask of grave concern. Piles of official-looking documents were spread out before her. "Maya," she began, her voice heavy with a carefully rehearsed regret, "we need to talk about the portfolio." She proceeded to spin a complex tale about a volatile market and a highly recommended tech stock that had unexpectedly collapsed. A significant portion of my trust fund, she claimed, was simply gone. She pushed a spreadsheet across the table, a dizzying grid of numbers and financial jargon that meant nothing to me. "I am so sorry, Sweet Pea," she said, her eyes welling up with convincing tears. "I feel like I failed you. I failed your father." The old Maya would have rushed to comfort her, but the new Maya felt a cold, hard knot of suspicion tighten in her stomach. The practical consequences were immediate. My allowance was slashed out of sheer necessity. Trips to the grocery store became exercises in humiliation as I stood in the aisle mentally calculating the cost of milk and bread, sometimes having to put items back at the checkout. I started making excuses to my friends, turning down movie nights and dinner invitations because I couldn't afford them.
I was a 24-year-old woman with a substantial inheritance, yet I was counting loose change to buy a cup of coffee. I was trapped in a state of enforced dependency, of financial child, and my jailer was the very person I was supposed to trust. Next, she systematically dismantled my support system. Her methods were insidious. When Sarah came over, my mother would pull her aside with a worried expression, speaking in a stage whisper, just loud enough for me to overhear. "I'm so glad you're here for Maya. She's been so withdrawn and moody lately. She just locks herself in her room. I'm worried sick." To me, she'd present the opposite narrative. "Sarah seems so distracted lately, doesn't she? I think her new job is taking up all her energy. Maybe you two are just growing apart." She became an expert at twisting my words, relaying messages with a slightly altered, more hurtful spin. A simple text from me saying I was tired became, "Maya isn't feeling up to seeing anyone." The calls and invitations from friends slowed to a trickle, replaced by an awkward silence. They were caught in the middle, unsure of who or what to believe. The house, once my sanctuary, began to feel like an isolation chamber, its quiet rooms amplifying my loneliness. The silence was the loudest sound in my life. The final and cruelest stage of the unraveling was the gaslighting. She began to actively rewrite our shared history, denying things she had said or done with such conviction that I started to question my own sanity. If I dared to bring up the conversation I'd overheard at the barbecue, her eyes would fill with a deep, bottomless hurt. "Maya, honey, that never happened. Why would you invent something so cruel? I'm worried about you. Your grief, maybe it's causing you to misremember things." She questioned my recollection of everything, from small promises to significant childhood memories. "No, sweet pea, your father always said he wanted you to be a lawyer, not an artist. You're romanticizing it." I began to live in a constant state of mental fog, second-guessing every memory, every feeling. Was I too sensitive? Was I paranoid? The constant doubt was more exhausting than any argument. It was a poison that made me distrust the one person I had left, myself. My lowest point arrived on a bleak, rainy Tuesday. I had just received a final rejection email for a freelance design project I had been counting on. My personal savings were gone. My friends were ghosts. I felt utterly and completely adrift. I was sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot, the rain drumming a mournful, relentless rhythm on the roof, and I shattered. I put my head on the steering wheel and sobbed a raw, guttural sound of pure loss. I wasn't just crying for the lost project or the fading friendships. I was grieving the mother I thought I had, the beautiful, loving woman who I now realized had never existed at all. She was a fiction. In that moment of absolute despair, something inside me shifted. The grief, hot and searing, cooled into a hard, dense core of anger. The sadness solidified into a quiet, unshakable resolve. I lifted my head and looked at the broken girl reflected in the rain-streaked window. No more. I would not let her break me. I would not let her erase me. I didn't know how, but I made a silent vow to that tear-stained face. I would find the truth, and I would take my life back.
The vow I made in that car became my secret lifeline. Outwardly, I retreated even further, playing the part of the defeated daughter my mother expected me to be. I became quiet, compliant, and melancholy. I let her believe her campaign had been a success, that I was now fully under her thumb. This new, deceptive meekness was my camouflage.
It gave me the freedom to move through the house unnoticed, to begin my search for the truth. I started in the one place that felt like holy ground, my father's study. My mother avoided the room, claiming the memories were too painful. For me, it was the only room in the house where the air didn't feel thin, the only place where I could still feel his quiet, steady presence. For weeks, my search was fruitless. I meticulously sorted through his old books, his files of neatly organized receipts, and boxes of faded photographs, finding only poignant reminders of a happier, more honest time. I was beginning to lose hope, to believe that maybe I was as lost as my mother wanted me to be. Then one evening, I was dusting the highest shelf of the built-in bookcase, a task I had been putting off. My fingers brushed against something hard and rectangular, tucked behind a row of leather-bound encyclopedias. I pulled it out. It was a small, dark wood box, beautifully made but unadorned, with an old-fashioned brass lock. There was no key. A jolt, electric and immediate, went through me. And then a memory surfaced, hazy at first, then sharpening into focus. My 10th birthday. My father, his eyes crinkling at the corners, placing a small, ornate key on a silver chain around my neck. "This is the key to your future, Maya," he had said. "Keep it safe." I had thought it was just a sweet, sentimental trinket. A frantic energy seized me. I tore my bedroom apart, my hands shaking as I rummaged through old jewelry boxes and keepsake chests. Finally, at the bottom of a dusty box filled with childhood report cards and concert tickets, I found it. The silver chain had tarnished, but the small brass key was unmistakable. My heart hammered against my ribs as I returned to the study. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft, metallic click that sounded as loud as a gunshot in the silent house. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. Inside, there were no hidden deeds or stacks of cash. There was something far more valuable: the truth. On top lay a stack of worn, leather-bound journals, my father's familiar, elegant script filling the pages. Beneath them was a small bundle of letters, tied with a faded silk ribbon. I sank into his old leather chair, the worn material creaking in protest, and I began to read. The story that unfolded on those pages was the story of a man who loved his wife deeply, but was not blind to her deep-seated flaws. He wrote about her terrifying need for control, her casual, almost compulsive relationship with the truth, and his growing gnawing fear over her possessiveness of me. He knew. All those years, he had seen it. One entry, dated just 6 months before he died, was circled in red ink. "Helen's grip on Maya is tightening. She sees her as an extension of herself, not as a person. I have made arrangements. I have set up a separate trust, an untouchable one, with George Abbott as the sole trustee. She must never know about it. It is Maya's safety net, a lifeline from her own mother. George has instructions to contact her on her 25th birthday. I pray to God that by then she will be strong enough to see the truth." George Abbott, my father's oldest friend and our family lawyer, a man I hadn't seen in years. Beneath the journals were the letters. They were from a man I didn't know, and they revealed a long-term affair. But it wasn't the infidelity that took my breath away. It was my mother's own words, quoted and celebrated by her lover. She complained about the unending burden of raising me. She boasted about how she had successfully clipped my wings to keep me dependent and close to home. And she outlined in chilling detail her plan to drain my primary inheritance to fund a new life with him in Europe once I was settled and out of the way. I was not her daughter. I was a project, a bank account, and an obstacle. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. The grief was a physical weight, a crushing pressure on my chest. The mother I had loved and mourned was a ghost. She had never been real. She was a character, a carefully constructed fiction my actual mother had been playing my entire life. But as the initial, devastating wave of pain receded, something else took its place. A cold, diamond-hard clarity. I was not crazy. I was not paranoid. I was not fragile. I was a victim of a brilliant, long-term deception. In that dusty, silent study, holding my father's last words in my hands, the power balance of our entire world shifted irrevocably. My mother thought she was the puppet master, but I now held the strings. The victim was gone. The strategist had just been born.
In the wake of my discovery, a profound and unnerving calm settled over me. The emotional hurricane had passed, leaving behind a landscape of quiet, steely resolve. There would be no tearful confrontations, no screaming matches, no dramatic scenes. My mother had built her life on a foundation of emotional chaos and deception. I would dismantle it with calm, methodical, undeniable truth. My role as the subdued, broken daughter became my greatest asset. My silence was no longer a symptom of her oppression. It was the shield behind which I forged my weapons. My first act was to call George Abbott. I bought a cheap, untraceable cell phone with cash from the small emergency fund I'd hidden away. My hand was shaking as I dialed the number for his law firm, my voice barely a whisper when I asked for him. My name is Maya. My father was David. I found his journals. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then George's warm, kind voice, a voice I hadn't heard since my father's funeral, came through the speaker. Maya, I've been waiting for this call for a very long time. Our meeting in his quiet, book-lined office was like stepping out of a fog and into the light. George was a kind-faced, white-haired man with the same honest eyes as my father. He confirmed everything. My father, with heartbreaking foresight, had established a completely separate, untouchable trust. It was substantial, a fortress of financial security my mother had never known existed. It was his final act of protection. George provided me with a mountain of documentation, the official papers for the secret trust, and, crucially, copies of the original, unaltered statements for the trust my mother managed. The numbers told a story of methodical, breathtaking theft. The bad investment was a complete fabrication. The statements showed a clear, consistent pattern of large-scale transfers to a series of personal accounts under her name alone. She hadn't lost my money. She had systematically stolen it. This was no longer just a heartbreaking, emotional story. It was documented, prosecutable fraud. With George's counsel, my quiet preparation began. Every move was calculated. I spent an afternoon at a copy shop, duplicating the most damning of my father's journal entries and the letters from my mother's lover. I created a binder, a library of her lies, with the doctored bank statements she had shown me placed side by side with the real ones. The contrast was stark and irrefutable. I opened a new bank account at a different bank, a small act of independence that felt monumental. And with George's help, I began the legal process to assume full control of my father's secret legacy, a process that would culminate on my fast-approaching 25th birthday. The most challenging part was living the lie at home. It was an exercise in supreme self-control. I had to sit at the dinner table and listen to her lament our tight financial situation, all while knowing she had embezzled a fortune from me. I had to nod and look thoughtful,
as she offered me advice on my future, a future she had systematically sabotaged. Once she even brought me a small bouquet of daisies just to cheer you up. The old Maya would have wept with gratitude. The new Maya simply smiled, said thank you, and felt a chilling pity for this woman who was so lost in her own fiction. Each lie she told, each act of feigned affection was just another piece of evidence, another brick in the wall of my resolve. I was not seeking revenge. I was seeking a reckoning. The quiet, dignified justice my father had died trying to ensure for me. As my 25th birthday drew near, my mother announced her grand plan, a lavish dinner party to celebrate. A proper celebration for my wonderful, brave daughter, she declared. She invited everyone, all of our relatives, her closest friends, the very people who formed the audience for her years-long performance of perfect motherhood. It was the perfect stage, the perfect trap, and she was building it herself. As she bustled around, ordering catering and choosing a centerpiece, I finalized my preparations with George. The stage was set, the evidence was organized, the audience was invited. I was ready. In the hollow, echoing silence that followed the party, the real work of my life began. Not the work of fighting, but the work of quiet, deliberate rebuilding. My mother was gone by morning. She left without a word, slipping out of the house like a thief in the dawn, leaving behind only the scent of her perfume and 24 years of lies. The fallout was swift. Relatives either called with awkward, stammering apologies or, more often, disappeared into a fog of embarrassed silence, unwilling to be caught in the wreckage of such a spectacular deception. I didn't mind. The quiet was clean. The silence was peace. With George Abbott's steady guidance, I legally and officially took control of my entire inheritance, the untouchable fortress my father had secretly built for me, and the pillaged remains of the one my mother had controlled. The legal process was a formality. The evidence was overwhelming. The first thing I did was put the house on the market. Selling the beautiful gilded cage with its soft yellow walls and suffocating memories was the most liberating act of my life. I moved into a small, bright apartment in a part of the city I had always loved, a space that was entirely and unequivocally my own. I spent a month painting the walls a calming shade of green, buying mismatched furniture from thrift stores, and filling the space with plants and books. For the first time since my father died, I felt truly at home. Slowly, carefully, I began to mend the fences my mother had tried to burn down. I met with Sarah for coffee, and over the course of 3 hours, I told her everything. She listened with tears in her eyes, her shock turning to a fierce protective anger on my behalf. "I am so sorry, Maya," she said, grabbing my hand across the table. "I should have known. I should have fought for you." Rebuilding that trust and the trust of my other friends was a healing balm on the raw wounds of my isolation. This real-life story of my survival became a new, stronger foundation for our friendships. Months later, my Aunt Carol called. Her voice was hesitant, full of a pity I didn't want. She told me my mother was living in a small, rented room in a town I'd never heard of. The man from the letters, the one she had planned a new life with, had vanished the moment he learned the money was gone. She was alone, and for the first time in her life, she had nothing. A ghost of the daughter I used to be felt a flicker of something, a conditioned response to her pain, but it wasn't my responsibility to save her from the life she had chosen. Still, I made one final gesture. Through George, I arranged for her rent to be paid for a single year, an anonymous transfer. It wasn't an act of forgiveness, and it wasn't an invitation for reconciliation. It was a final quiet act of severing. It was a statement to myself and to the universe that I would not be defined by her cruelty. My strength would be measured not by a desire for her suffering, but by my own capacity for peace. That was a boundary she could never cross. I never spoke to her again.
My life is quiet now, and beautifully and wonderfully ordinary. I run a small but successful graphic design business from my sunny apartment. I have friends who I trust with my whole heart. I am building a future on my own terms, from a foundation of truth. The locked box still sits on my bookshelf, not as a monument to the betrayal, but as a reminder of the strength I found within it. It taught me the most painful and valuable lesson of my life, that true freedom isn't about escaping a prison of iron bars, but about finding the courage to turn the key on the gilded cage you were taught to call home.
Thank you for being a part of my journey. If you've ever had to reclaim your own story from someone else's lies, please share your experience in the comments. Your voice deserves to be heard. Subscribe to Deception Diaries for more real-life stories of strength and the quiet pursuit of truth.